Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet.
Hello and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. I've titled this particular podcast, Men and Slightly Older Women. Younger men and older women has been a subject that's been talked about a great deal over the years. I mean, there's books that have been written about it. I happen to know an author or two who has written a book on the subject because of their own personal life's experience, and I've found the subject fascinating. And I do have a podcast that I talked about on the relationship side and talked about younger men and older women. Now, I picked slightly older because I'm talking about an age range that's a little less expansive, say maybe 5 to 7 years. And that's not a huge age gap. Because oftentimes when we talk about younger men and older women, we could be talking about an age range anywhere from, 10, 15, 20 years or more. And the virtues of those relationships as it happens for the man and the women. Now, I'm going to touch on those and then move more specifically to what I've titled this particular podcast. But as it were, and if you haven't heard my podcast on that, let me do a bit of a recap, and that's to talk about the virtues about the situation. Whereas if you're a man in your, let's say, I'll just choose a number. Let's say you're a man in your early to mid 30s. And you're dating a woman 10 to 15, maybe 20 years older than you. Let me pick the higher number. Let's say 20 years. If you're 30, 35, and you're dating a woman that's 50 or 55, one of the things that you have you're going to have in that experience is you have a woman who has lived a great deal of life. She's likely been married, or if not, she's definitely established herself in her life. She's comfortable with who she is. She's learned a little bit about herself, her sexuality. If she has kids, then they're probably older. And if they are younger, there's probably some sort of shared custody thing. So she'll have kids part of the time, and the other parent will have them the other time. So you will have availability to have one-on-one time with that person. And if not, then if the kids are her responsibility full time, they may be older, they may have a life of their own. Say they're probably teenagers. Let's say if the woman is, in her 50s. But what you get as a man when you're dating a woman of that age, you get someone who's generally fairly confident, can certainly appreciate that she is being appreciated by a man. Because one of the topic of conversations that comes up for women who are older is that they feel that men of their similar age and generation do not respect them. And whether it's because of men feeling threatened, or maybe men who might be slightly older, or maybe the woman was attracted to older men because that was the norm when she was growing up, but may have felt that those older men are, let's say, have an old stereotype of how women are to be or to behave. And that's no longer appealing, because if you pick a woman who is in her 50s, 40s, 50s nowadays, she's probably college educated and has experienced life considerably different than her mother. Or at least if she has grown up around other more powerful women, being college educated gives you a lot of empowerment. You see yourself as a different person because you are brought up in the experience of learning to do your own research, learning to be confident, making it known that you exist in the world, and women have fought for these kinds of things for a long time, and feeling appreciated for all of that work and sacrifices that it takes to be in that place. Men who are younger have likely lived or experienced be in a sister or a mom or somebody or some feminine influence in their life who is not behaving in some sort of subservient fashion. And I mean that as a compliment. They do not see themselves as someone who is there for the existence of a man. They see themselves, the women see themselves as being very independent, very responsible, having a voice, and being active in their own lives, making decisions about what they want. And also, and this is something very important, that when they decide to take on the challenges of life, they are not only just a voice, but they're instrumental in making it happen. So that when they partner up with someone, they're not just along for the ride. They're actually have their hands on the levers, the steering wheel, whatever your metaphor you want to use. And this brings a different person to the experience. And when you meet someone like that, that can be very, very good in terms of how you learn to view other people. And when men see this, some men are not intimidated by this thing. And I think when older women are talking about, I'm going back to the woman, say, that's 15, 20 years older than a young man. When older women see that a younger man is not intimidated by her success, then that's very comforting. Because quite often men are threatened by a woman's success. Because men are used to being in power, and when they can't control things, then their insecurities come out. So that becomes less and less of an issue when there's a younger man and an older woman. So that's sort of a recap of some of the subjects that I've talked about in the younger men, older women. Not to mention the sex. Okay, so let me cover that. As women get older, they become much more comfortable with their bodies, the way it's shaped, and because they are less insecure about that. And at the men, they themselves are not really overly focused on that. Now, that's not to take anything away from the women who actually exercise more and take that on. If they go to the gym and eat right and have a great shape, that's fine. But if you're a woman that doesn't do that, and your shape is not the model on the cover of the magazine, that's okay too. And men are very comfortable with that. What men find sexy is a woman who is comfortable in her own skin. There is a different kind of man for every kind of woman that's out there. And as a woman who would be listening to this podcast, understand that. Maybe the guy that you're looking at that moment, maybe somebody that you're attracted to, but maybe that's not a good fit. There are other guys out there that will find you attractive, and you can just wait a while and he will show up. Or take the initiative. Guys appreciate that too. But let me pivot to the topic of, or at least the title that I have of this podcast, which is Men and Slightly Older Women. And I'm talking something a little narrower in terms of age range, to spread, say maybe 5, 7, maybe 8 years. And the impact that these men have on the women and vice versa. Now, there's somebody I spoke to. In fact, I've spoken to a number of women on this particular subject, but there is one particular person that I had a fairly lengthy conversation with about her life, and I choose not to use her name because I didn't get permission to do that, but because I don't want to embarrass her by any way, shape, or form. But she did give me permission to talk about the subject itself. And, for example, the details that she shared with me, she was very open about, and I appreciate that. So the man that's in her life is just slightly younger than she is, but she is someone who was married for a number of years and wanted to share the transformation that she had had because she was involved with this younger man. So I'm going to talk about that, and I'll be right back after the break.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello, you're listening to Golden State Media Concepts, a sex podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. I'm talking about men and slightly older women. The person I am using as the subject for this particular podcast, I've talked to her at length, and she was sharing some details about her life, which I found fascinating. She was married for a number of years and had children who have since grown up and they've gone to college. She was in a relationship that she was committed to for a number of years. And, the relationship itself just seemed she grew apart. And that's just a very tactful way of explaining how sometimes these things change for you in life. And like a lot of people who have reached a stage in life, she was, in her late 50s and she's attractive, but sometimes you just don't see yourself as being really involved with someone. You just kind of go about your day to day. And this is something that was the experience that she was having. She'd met a couple of guys and they were nice and they were about her age too, or slightly older. And, a little bit of chemistry there, not a whole lot of spark. It didn't last very long, but, she kind of turned around and went back doing her day to day. And then she met a gentleman who she thought was fairly interesting enough to spend some time with, and wound up getting a lot out of the relationship. Now, yes, he was slightly younger than she was by, a few years. And what she found was, number one, it was very refreshing. So to the women who would maybe consider dating a guy that's slightly younger, then I want to give you my green light for that, if that's something that you're open to. And if you haven't been, consider it. Because here's an example of a woman who did that. Now, she wasn't against dating anyone younger in the past, but it just seemed like the age was such so dissonant that it wasn't something that she could really get her head around. So it just didn't seem like it was something that was going to last. So she didn't want, say, maybe 15 or 20 years, but maybe 7 or 8 would have been better for her. And I think the gentleman that showed up in her life is about 6 or 7 years, but the point being, this was something of an individual who probably had more of an opportunity of being a life partner. And that was something that was attractive about this man. So that, along with the fact that there were a number of things that she was surprised by. She had no idea that this individual had the capacity to be as great of a problem solver. Now, the young man that she picked had a family of his own and is gainfully employed. He has a career, a job that he's been at for a number of years. And, he obviously had a number of relationships on his own, but had finally gotten to a place where he was looking for somebody that was more compatible. And and now compatibility is a word, but what does it mean when it comes to your life? Well, it means you are a sum of all of your experiences, and it's important that you be able to quantify what those things are. So if you meet someone, you want to be able to define for yourself what these mean. So you're in conversation, you're doing an interview, you're asking this other person about their life, their relationship with their kids, their ex, their parents, their siblings, because that sort of gives you a picture of who this individual is, and that they've had challenges, and we've all had those. How do they solve their problems? Because if you want to be involved with somebody to the extent that you're going to invite this person into your life, and remember, I'm talking about this age-different relationship. It's not about necessarily dating somebody who's an old soul, but you want someone who is mature, and that's going to be very reassuring, because we all want to feel like we are with someone who is our emotional equal, intellectual equal too, if we can find that, but somebody who's emotionally capable of being there. And that's one of the things that a lot of the younger men have been able to bring to a relationship with an older woman. Now, not every guy does this, and that's why I say not every guy is going to be a good catch for this kind of thing. You're going to have to get into the nuts and bolts of what this young man is about, or a younger man is about. And this is something that she had processed. So when she met the guy, he seemed like he had a lot on the ball. Now, the age wasn't an issue. And, here's something else that I might mention in this day and age, ethnicity. Now, that's something that, some people feel a lot more confident about being able to cross the different ethnicities of people. So if you're of one culture and you're interested in another culture, it might be a perfect opportunity for you to learn something about someone else, and especially if the person might be multilingual. It might be fascinating to be with them in their culture and see them interact, and it just gives you a lift. That might be something that's exciting to you. But back to the person that I had spoken to, this man that she had met, he brought a lot to the table. And she obviously had high expectations. And even though initially she wasn't really necessarily trying to put it all out there that she wanted this guy, she pretty much told him in the beginning, we'll just kind of cruise along and see how it goes. I mean, she wound up really falling head over heels for the guy. And lucky him to have her, because, again, she brought a lot to the table, and she wanted to be sure that in her next relationship, this was something that was going to be there for her as well. So here's something that younger man brought. Number one, he brought his nurturing, because he had kids of his own. Again, like I said, he'd been in relationships, so he brought nurturing. This young man had been through enough that he had to process his own stuff. So he was ready to be in a relationship with someone else who was also mature thinking. Stability, because like I said, he was gainfully employed. And he knew how to problem solve. And I think that's something that comes with maturity. But when you've had a family and you've dealt with the ups and downs, the sick kids, the relatives, the extended family who needs help, whether it's a loan or advice, being able to be there for people and having the right attitude about it. I mean, it's one thing to be there for someone, but do you do it out of love and support, or are you grumpy and angry about it? You see, the last thing you want to do when you get older is bring an angry person into your life. That's not sexy at all. And I can tell you from having had my own experience, generally when we see somebody like that coming, we tend to go the other way, because you feel like they're just bringing something else toxic with them. So that was another strength that this younger man brought to this woman. Something else, and this is something that she didn't necessarily experience in her marriage, was that this young man brought a sense of vitality, not only in his life, but he really infused it into her. How she saw herself, and that this was a very important distinction, because before she hadn't really ever seen herself as very pretty or as beautiful. But with this man, she finally saw that about herself, because one of the things that he did as he introduced her to some sexy styles of things that she kind of had in her mind that she would like to do, but he gave her full-on support to try things a little bit different, and it took off like a rocket. I'm going to pause here, and when I come back, I'm going to expand on that some more.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, and I'm talking about men and slightly older women. As is the subject of this particular podcast, I have a person that I talked to at some length about her own life and the experience that she had with a man that she had met. And one of the things that she had really appreciated about him is that he liked her for who she was, for who she is. Not was, but is. And in addition to that, she felt very comfortable not only sharing her emotions with him, but when it came to something, and this is something that can be a very touchy subject, we all have our way of presenting ourselves to the world in the clothes and the styles that we wear. And sometimes our styles can be a bit dated based on the generation that we came from. And certainly women are affected by this as well. And, you know, if you catalog shop, then you probably find lots of things, lots of opportunities to try different things. Then, you know, if you shop in the community that you live in, sometimes you don't find something that works for you. But in this particular case, this person that she was dating or found that she was really connected with, he was very good at finding things in a catalog for her. So he bought some things. She tried them on. She looked great. She even showed them to her kids, her daughters, which are grown. And they just love the new look. And fortunately for her, it was something that she also found a love of doing. And it was something that she said, you know, I've always liked looking nice and dressing up for my guy because I know that he has eyes for me, kind of thing. And it really worked. This worked not only for her self-esteem, but you can imagine that when you feel good on the inside and you feel good about the person you're with, then the sex was off the charts. Now, this isn't something that she felt like she experienced in her marriage. And, you know, generally when the relationships tend to go, then that's something that tends to go also. And she, you know, admitted that it wasn't, the sex in her marriage wasn't always bad. It's just that it kind of lacked a little bit of spark for her. And that's kind of how things go. So that's no slight on her ex, but that's what a lot of people say about a relationship when it starts to end. But as she felt embraced for who she was and then was trying on the different styles, and it actually worked for her. And a lot of fun things that they did. She again, I was interviewing her and just watching her light up. It was fascinating, and I'm so happy for her. And also, her people that are around her have seen the change, the metamorphosis, and she's become more of who she always has been, and that's something that I want to emphasize too. A lot of this is already inside of you, and it's about finding a person who allows that, who helps that blossom, who wants that for you as much as you want it for yourself. And sometimes younger men are much more secure in being that, because they know how important it is to be an individual, and they're not intimidated. At least if you experience a younger man who approaches you, you've got to know that there's some sort of interest there. And this is something that this the subject of my story experienced too. He was interested. He was very happy to share his life, his experiences, and she very much wanted to be a part of that. So this is a really good connection here. And going forward from that, like I said, the styles, she is very up to date, and she can dress up for the board meeting, or if she wants a night out in the town, she can dress for that. Or she is also the object of his affection, and it's nice to feel that connection. And you don't necessarily have to be age different to experience that, but this was something that was unique to her experience, because the men who were of her age did not seem to bring that to the table. Maybe they would have done so had somebody told them to do it, but as it is with creativity, it's nice when somebody else has it also, and that you don't have to have all the ideas. And this was something that she experienced. And taking it to the bedroom, she said that, and I feel comfortable in saying this about her, she had said from her own experience that she had never had lovemaking as intense and as long-lasting as it did with the new guy, because he was there every step of the way. And at first she was a little intimidated because he was a little younger and brought everything to the table. But she said that disappeared not too long after. And she felt that she was capable of keeping up with him every step of the way. So if you're an older woman and you worry sometimes about being able to keep up with your younger lover, there is a lot to be said for women who are very comfortable in their own skin, their own sexuality, and bringing their own experiences to the bedroom. That's something that a younger man looks forward to. He can appreciate that. And the stamina thing is not as much of a problem as a lot of women make it out to be. So if there does come about a point where you feel like there might be some issues with regard to, and some of the, and I speak this tenderly, if there's problems with lubrication or something like that, you can always see your physician. They're very happy to help with those kinds of concerns, and they can be dealt with. And, and this is something that I find very nice about a lot of these types of relationships. The younger men will go with you. If you want to go to the doctor, they'll go with you. They are very happy to be seen with you as a support person. They will go shopping with you. If you want to go to the mall and do some shopping, they're happy to go with you. That's something they like doing. Being a companion, being a partner, doing the kinds of things that you like to do. You have to have the wherewithal to say what it is you want. Sometimes in relationships, we want people to read our minds. And that, I find, is one of the more challenging things to do for anyone, man or woman. But if you express yourself, it's very nice to feel like you're going to be accepted. And this is something else that, again, the subject of my story here has expressed many times in her own experience, that she felt accepted. She felt loved. She felt appreciated. And she has the energy and the enthusiasm to want to do all kinds of things. And I think when you experience life in that way, it rejuvenates you. And this is something that you can look forward to. So if you've not had that before, or let's say maybe you have, maybe you did date a younger person at one time and you're thinking about it again. If you've had that good experience, revisit it. I think it's something that's worthwhile. And as far as the quality of the relationships, you can date them for a while. Some people are like to date many people at the same time. Decide for you what it is you're comfortable with and be that person. So men and slightly older women, it seems to be a very good combination. It works, whether it's short term, long term, the sex, the companionship, taking trips, going to the shows, all kinds of things, the nurturing and the conversation. Now, something I will say about that's something from time to time that younger men and older women might have a little challenge with. If generationally you're a number of years apart, then you might wind up having to do a lot of research in order to be able to be in the same conversation, at least topic-wise. So that's something that tends to happen in the age-different relationships. And, just to mention this, when it comes to children, that can be a challenge. And I'm talking more so in terms of the long-term relationships, if we're talking marriage. But generally, if we're talking someone in a dating capacity or something in that regards, talking about children in terms of having them is usually not an issue. It's just that if you're talking about having children as a younger man with an older woman, then usually older women are past the child rearing or bearing years or don't want to be saddled with that kind of responsibility later on in life. They generally want the freedom. So that's just a caveat. Again, I did a program some time ago on younger men and older women. I may revisit that subject. But for today, I talked about men and slightly older women, some of the benefits, some of the challenges, if they're, and for most people, they're not insurmountable. I think if there's a desire to do it, then I say go for it. Try it out. See what it's like for you. And, embrace the experience. I'm John Johnson. This is the GSMC Sex Podcast, and I want to thank you for listening.